The bridge of the UNS Defiant hummed with quiet efficiency as Captain Maria Chen reviewed the sensor logs for the third time that hour. She was a compact woman in her early 40s, with sharp eyes that had seen too many diplomatic incidents along this border. The patrol frigate maintained its position at the edge of human-claimed space, exactly 200,000 kilometers from the boundary with the Zhen hierarchy. Chen had learned to be precise about these things. The Zhen valued precision, or at least they claimed to when it suited their purposes. "Contact," her sensor officer announced, breaking the routine. "Zhen battle group bearing 273 crossing the boundary line." Chen felt her stomach tighten, but her voice remained calm. "How many ships?" "8 confirmed. 3 battle cruisers, 5 destroyers. They're not slowing down, Captain." This was not a navigational error. Chen had been in the service long enough to know the difference between a mistake and a statement. She opened a channel, keeping her tone diplomatic. "Zhen vessels, this is Captain Maria Chen of the United Nations ship Defiant. You have entered territory claimed by Earth. Please state your intentions." The response came quickly, and it carried the distinctive arrogance that Chen had come to associate with Zhen nobility. "This is Ambassador General Thex of the Zhen hierarchy. We do not recognize your claim to this region. Our navigation is not subject to human approval." Chen's jaw clenched. She knew Thex by reputation, a political appointee, nephew to the High Coordinator, given military command as a prestige position. The worst kind of officer, one with authority but no wisdom. "Ambassador General, I respectfully request that you withdraw to avoid an incident. We have no desire for conflict." "Your desires are irrelevant, human. You have been in space for barely 3 decades. The Zhen hierarchy has navigated these stars for millennia. Stand aside." Chen glanced at her tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander James Park, who shook his head slightly. The Zhen formation was aggressive, weapons powered but not locked. A provocation, not yet an attack. She made her decision. "All ships maintain position but raise shields. Weapons to standby, do not lock targets." The 2 other ships in her patrol group, the Vigilant and the Ranger, acknowledged. 3 frigates against 8 Zhen warships. Not a fight they could win, but Chen hoped it would not come to that. Surely even Thex would not be foolish enough to. The Zhen battlecruiser's main gun lit up the darkness of space. The Vigilant took the hit directly to its port side. Its shields flared and died in seconds, and the ship began venting atmosphere. Chen watched in horror as secondary explosions rippled through the frigate's hull. "All ships, evasive action, return fire." The Ranger lasted only seconds longer, caught by concentrated fire from 3 Zhen destroyers. 200 men and women died in those first 30 seconds, before humanity even had a chance to shoot back. Chen's hands flew across her console. "Helm, pattern Delta 7. Tactical, target the wounded battlecruiser, concentrate all forward batteries." The Defiant's weapons carved into the Zhen ship's shields, and for a moment Chen felt savage satisfaction as she saw the enemy's shield generators overload. Her ship's railguns found their mark, tearing through armor plating. Then the rest of the Zhen battle group turned their attention to her ship. Chen knew she had seconds at best. "All hands, abandon ship. Get to the escape pods now." She was the last one off the bridge, the protocols of her service ingrained too deeply to ignore. As her pod rocketed away from the dying Defiant, she watched through the viewport as the frigate that had been her home for 3 years broke apart under Zhen fire. The Zhen fleet did not pursue the escape pods. That at least was something. Chen floated in the darkness, rescue beacon active, and began composing her report. The black box data would tell the story clearly enough, but she wanted her own account on record. Everything had been recorded. Every hail, every warning, every shot. Not that it would matter. Chen had served long enough to know that justice and politics were rarely the same thing. 6 weeks later, Ambassador David Okonkwo stood before the Galactic Council with the weight of humanity's fate on his shoulders. The council chamber was a magnificent space, designed to inspire awe in those who entered. It was a vast sphere, with each species delegation positioned on platforms that floated in perfect geometric arrangement. The whole structure spoke of order, of ancient civilization, of powers that had ruled the stars since before humanity discovered fire. Okonkwo was a tall man with silver hair and the kind of face that could have been carved from stone. He had been a judge on Earth's international court before taking this position, and he understood better than most how justice could be shaped by those in power. He had prepared meticulously for this presentation, knowing that the odds were stacked against him. "Honored counselors," he began, his voice carried by the chamber's perfect acoustics to every delegation present. "I present the evidence of unprovoked aggression by the Gen hierarchy against human vessels in legally claimed space." He activated the holographic display, and the sensor logs played out in three-dimensional detail. The Gen crossing the border, Chen's calm requests for withdrawal, Thex's dismissive response, and then the firing, crystal clear, with timestamps showing the Gen fired first. The chamber remained silent as the recording played. Okonkwo watched the faces of the various delegates. The insectoid chorus clicked their mandibles in what he had learned to recognize as distress. The aquatic Merkai rippled their chromatophores in sympathy. But the major powers, the Veloran Confederacy, the Torgeth Unity, the Crystalline Luminar Collective, remained impassive, and the Gen delegation, led by High Coordinator Zentar himself, showed nothing but cold disdain. When the presentation ended, Okonkwo laid out humanity's position. "We seek acknowledgement of Gen aggression, reparations for the families of the 200 dead, and guarantees that our borders will be respected. Humanity wishes only to coexist peacefully with all species of the galaxy." Ambassador General Thex rose to present the Gen response. The young officer had been retrieved from the battlefield and returned to his people, and he showed no shame for his actions. "The Gen hierarchy regrets the loss of life, but the responsibility lies with human aggression. For 30 years, humanity has expanded into space at an alarming rate, claiming systems without regard for established navigation routes or traditional territories. Their military buildup has been noted by many species. The incident at the border was the natural result of human provocations." Okonkwo felt ice in his chest. This was the play, then. Turn victim into aggressor. He had seen it before in earthly courts, but the scale here was far larger. "With respect, the evidence clearly shows." "The evidence," Thex interrupted, his voice rising, "shows that human vessels refuse to yield to Gen passage, that human weapons fired upon Gen ships, that humanity continues to militarize despite being a young and unproven species." The debate went on for hours. Okonkwo presented fact after fact, but he could see the political calculations happening behind the delegates' eyes. The Gen hierarchy controlled 94 star systems. They were a major economic power, a military force, a civilization 2,000 years old. Humanity controlled 8 systems and had been in space for 30 years. When the vote came, Okonkwo was not surprised, but he was still disappointed in himself for hoping. The council ruled 94-7 that human military provocations and aggressive expansion had created the conditions for the conflict. Humanity was ordered to pay reparations to the Gen for damages to diplomatic relations. Then came the crushing blow, delivered by the Luminar chief counselor in a voice that resonated like struck crystal. "Furthermore, to ensure peace and demonstrate good faith, Earth is ordered to decommission 90% of its military fleet within 18 standard months. No more than 12 warships shall remain in service. Defensive platforms shall be reduced from 300 to 30. This is the Council's judgment." Okonkwo stood in that magnificent chamber, surrounded by the representatives of 100 worlds, and felt the weight of injustice settle on him like a physical thing. He thought of Captain Chen, who had done everything right and lost everything anyway. He thought of the 200 dead whose sacrifice meant nothing to these politicians. He thought of Earth, his home, being punished for being the victim. But Okonkwo had not become one of Earth's top legal minds by letting emotion control his actions. He straightened his shoulders, looked directly at the chief counselor, and spoke in a voice that carried no anger, no plea, just calm acceptance. "Earth will comply with the Council's ruling." The statement sent ripples through the chamber. Many had expected rage, defiance, perhaps even threats. But Okonkwo simply gathered his materials, nodded respectfully to the Council, and departed. Behind him, he could hear Ambassador General Thex laughing. President Elena Rodriguez sat in the Oval Office, watching the news feeds from across the galaxy. Humanity humbled, declared the Veloran networks. Young species learns its place, proclaimed the Torgeth broadcasters. Council asserts authority over aggressive newcomers, stated the more neutral Luminar reports. Rodriguez was a woman who had risen through politics by being underestimated. She was small, soft-spoken, and had a grandmotherly face that made people dismiss her, right up until she outmaneuvered them. She turned to her advisors, the carefully selected group of military commanders, intelligence officers, and strategic thinkers who would help navigate this crisis. Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen. She began with the Navy's senior commander, a woman in her 60s with ice in her veins and fire in her heart. Sarah Chen was no relation to Maria, though she had served with the younger woman and respected her greatly. "Ma'am, if we comply with this ruling, we will be defenseless. 12 warships cannot protect 8 star systems and over 1 billion people. The math doesn't work." Secretary Morrison. Rodriguez turned to her Secretary of Defense, a former Marine general named Thomas Morrison who looked like he had been carved from granite. "The Council has outmaneuvered us, ma'am. Refuse, we're branded as lawless and give them cause to sanction us or worse. If we comply, we're helpless. It's a no-win scenario." Rodriguez allowed herself a small smile. "I don't believe in no-win scenarios, gentlemen. Ambassador Okonkwo, your thoughts?" Okonkwo, who had returned to Earth immediately after the ruling, leaned forward. "Madam President, I've spent 6 weeks analyzing Council law. I believe there may be a third option, but it will require something unprecedented." "I'm listening." Council has the authority to regulate military forces of member species. Their charter is very specific about this: standing armies, naval forces, orbital defense networks operated by governments. But, he paused for effect, the Council has no jurisdiction over civilian assets. Admiral Chen frowned. "You're suggesting we convert military ships to civilian ownership." "I'm suggesting we do something that no other species has done because their political structures wouldn't allow it. We decentralize defense entirely, not just conversion of existing ships but a complete reimagining of how we protect ourselves." Rodriguez leaned back in her chair, her mind already racing ahead. "You want to privatize our military?" "No, ma'am. I want to eliminate the distinction between military and civilian. I want to make every human ship a potential warship, every colony a fortress, every citizen a defender. The Council thinks they can control us by limiting our military, but they're thinking in terms of their own hierarchical systems. They don't understand humanity's history." Secretary Morrison caught on first. "The militia tradition, the Second Amendment principle, an armed populace as the guarantor of freedom." "Exactly," Okonkwo said. "For most galactic species, military power is concentrated in government hands. Their civilians are truly civilian, unarmed, untrained, dependent on central authority for protection. But humans have a different history. We've always understood that a government powerful enough to protect you is powerful enough to oppress you, so we maintain the right of people to defend themselves." Admiral Chen's eyes lit up with understanding. "You want to take that principle and apply it on an interstellar scale. Not a government military that can be restricted but a civilian population that cannot." "Can it work?" Rodriguez asked. "Not legally, I trust Ambassador Okonkwo's analysis there, but practically. Can we really defend ourselves this way?" Morrison pulled up a holographic display. "It would require a massive cultural shift. Every colony would need to be self-sufficient for defense. Every civilian ship would need to be built with dual-use capability. Every citizen would need training. But, yes, ma'am, I think it could work, and it would make us very difficult to conquer. An enemy wouldn't be facing an army they could defeat in battle. They'd be facing an entire civilization in arms." Rodriguez made her decision. "Make it happen. Admiral Chen, begin the decommissioning process, make it very public, very compliant. Secretary Morrison, start reaching out to corporate leaders and colony governors. Ambassador Okonkwo, prepare the legal framework. I want this to be absolutely unassailable in Council law." She stood, looking at each of them in turn. "The Council wanted to weaken us. We're going to show them that our strength was never in our military. It was always in our people." The decommissioning of the human fleet began with great ceremony. 18 months was not much time, but humanity threw itself into the task with apparent earnestness. The galaxy watched with satisfaction as ship after ship was publicly retired from service. The mighty UNS Defiant, rebuilt after its destruction, was decommissioned in a ceremony attended by thousands. Captain Maria Chen, promoted despite the loss of her ship, stood at attention as the human flag was lowered from its mast. News services from a dozen species covered the event. The carrier UNS Stalingrad, flagship of the human fleet, capable of carrying 200 fighters, decommissioned. The battleship UNS Patton, whose railguns could crack a moon, decommissioned. One by one, the pride of humanity's navy was retired. Galactic Council inspectors arrived regularly to verify compliance. They found everything in order. Ship registrations were being transferred. Weapons systems were being removed. Defense platforms were being dismantled on schedule. The inspectors filed glowing reports about humanity's unexpected cooperation. What the inspectors didn't notice or didn't care about were the details that seemed insignificant in isolation. The decommissioned UNS Defiant was purchased at auction by the Earth Colonial Shipping Consortium, a civilian corporation. The sale was public and legal. The ship was renamed the Merchant Defiant and registered as a cargo hauler. The weapons were removed. That was verified. What wasn't noted in the inspection reports was that removed meant placed in secure storage in the cargo bay, available for reinstallation in under 4 hours. The military-grade shields were downgraded, also verified. The inspectors didn't ask why a civilian cargo ship needed shields that could withstand a Category 4 solar flare, nor did they check that these civilian shields actually had more raw power capacity than the military versions, simply spread across different frequency bands. The Mars Mining Corporation purchased 15 destroyers. The Titan Resource Extraction Company acquired 8 cruisers. The Ganymede Colonial Defense Cooperative bought 22 frigates. All perfectly legal transactions between a government and private entities. James Park, the former lieutenant commander who had served under Captain Chen, now wore a civilian suit instead of a uniform. He was the chief engineer for the Mars Mining Corporation's fleet modernization project. In reality, he was overseeing the conversion of military destroyers into mining vessels. He walked through the construction bay where the former UNS Ranger II was being converted. The ship's nameplate now read MMC Extraction 7. Park reviewed the specifications with his team. The main particle cannons have been removed as required, he said, gesturing to the empty hardpoints. They've been replaced with industrial plasma cutters for asteroid processing. He didn't mention that these plasma cutters had the same power output and targeting systems as military weapons. They were technically different devices. Technically. The missile tubes have been converted to ore sample launch systems, continued his second-in-command, a woman named former Lieutenant Lisa Rodriguez. They can launch mining probes at high velocity to embed sensors in target asteroids. The fact that these probes were the same size and acceleration profile as missiles was purely coincidental. And the armor, Park asked. Replaced with commercial-grade ablative plating, rated for high-temperature operations near stellar bodies. Rodriguez smiled slightly. Turns out that materials that can withstand proximity to a star are also quite effective at dissipating weapons fire. Funny how that works. Park moved through the ship, noting every change. The bridge had been redesigned for efficiency, which happened to give it better tactical displays than the military version had. The reactor had been upgraded to support industrial operations, which gave it 30% more power output. The crew quarters had been expanded because mining operations require long deployments, which meant the ship could carry twice as many personnel as before. How many ships are in the conversion program? Rodriguez asked quietly. Officially, 108 former military vessels sold to civilian corporations, but that's just the ones we're converting. Park pulled up a holographic display. We're also building new. The shipyards at Earth, Mars, and Titan have been contracted by various corporations to build specialized vessels for colonial expansion. The display showed the construction schedule. Hundreds of ships, all civilian, all perfectly legal. cargo haulers the size of battleships, mining vessels with suspicious amounts of armor, research ships with military-grade sensors, colonial transports that could double as troop carriers. And the colonies? Rodriguez asked. That's where it gets interesting, Park said. The Council limited government military platforms to 30, but there's no limit on civilian defense stations. Every colony is incorporating as an independent entity with the right to self-defense. They're building their own platforms, owned and operated by colonial cooperatives. He pulled up statistics. The Petra Colony Cooperative has contracted for 47 defense platforms. The new Nairobi Defense Association is building 63. The Tau Ceti Development Corporation has ordered 114, all privately owned, all legal, all outside council jurisdiction. Rodriguez whistled softly. How are we paying for all this? That's the beautiful part, Park said. We're not. The corporations are, and the corporations are owned by the colonists themselves. Every citizen of New Nairobi owns shares in the New Nairobi Defense Association. It's their money, their platforms, their choice. The government isn't building a military, the people are building their own defenses. Park looked at the ship taking shape before him. The Extraction 7 would never match a purpose-built warship in a straight fight, but it didn't need to. It just needed to be dangerous enough, and there needed to be enough of them that attacking humanity would be too costly to consider. How's the training program going? He asked. Beyond expectations, Rodriguez said. Turns out when you tell people they're responsible for their own defense, they take it seriously. We've got over 15 million civilians who have completed the basic defense training program. Another 50 million are enrolled. Colony militias are drilling regularly. It's like every colony has become a fortress. Park nodded slowly. He thought about the Council's ruling, about how they had tried to disarm humanity by limiting the military. They had no idea what they'd actually done. They'd forced humanity to tap into something much more dangerous than a government military. They'd awakened the tradition of the armed citizen, the militia member, the defender of home and hearth. The Council wanted us weak, he said quietly. They have no idea what they've created. 14 months after the Council's ruling, Ambassador General Thex sat in his luxurious quarters on the Gen homeworld, savoring his victory. Humans had been humiliated, forced to disarm, taught their place in the Galactic Order. His career, briefly tarnished by the incident that had started all this, was back on track. His aide entered with a report. Ambassador General, our scouts report unusual activity in human space. Thex barely looked up from his meal. Define unusual. Significant civilian ship construction. Many of their colonies appear to be building defensive installations. Civilian construction, Thex laughed. Let the humans build their little trading posts. Without a military, they are irrelevant. The Council ruling stands for another 4 months. Their decommissioning should be complete soon. Yes, sir, but the scale is notable, and our analysts indicate that some of these civilian vessels have capabilities that seem excessive for their stated purposes. Thex finally looked at his aide with irritation. Are you suggesting the humans are violating the Council ruling? Not exactly, sir. Everything appears to be civilian-owned and operated, but then there is no issue. The Council ruled on military forces, not civilian industry. Thex waved dismissively. The humans are trying to save face by pretending their civilian sector matters. It is pathetic. You are dismissed. The aide bowed and left, but Thex found his victory meal less satisfying than before. Humans. Even in defeat, they found ways to be irritating. Perhaps it was time to remind them of their place more directly. 3 weeks later, Thex brought his concerns to the Galactic Council. Honored counselors, the Gen hierarchy believes that humanity is attempting to circumvent the Council's ruling through legal technicalities. Their civilian sector shows signs of militarization. Ambassador Okonkwo stood calmly. The Council ruled on government military forces. Human-civilian commerce and defense cooperatives are not subject to those restrictions. We have provided complete documentation of all activities. Everything is in full compliance with Council law. The Chief Luminar Counselor reviewed the extensive documentation. Ambassador Okonkwo is correct. The Council's jurisdiction is over military forces. We cannot regulate civilian industry or private defense arrangements. Thex felt frustration rising. Then the ruling is meaningless. The humans are simply shifting their military capability to civilian hands. The humans are adapting, the counselor replied, as is their right. If the council wishes to regulate civilian activities, that would require a new charter, which would apply to all species equally. Does the Gen hierarchy wish to submit its civilian sector to council oversight? Thex fell silent. Of course the Gen did not want that. The hierarchy's power rested partly on civilian corporations that operated outside council regulation. However, the counselor continued, to address the Gen hierarchy's concerns, we will authorize an investigation to ensure humans are in technical compliance. If violations are found, sanctions will be applied. The investigation took 2 months. Council inspectors examined human space thoroughly. They found no violations of the ruling. The human government maintained only 12 military warships and 30 military platforms. Everything else was civilian-owned and operated. The inspectors did note in their report that humanity's civilian sector was unusually robust and that many civilian ships had dual-use capability. But there was no violation of council law. Thex read the report with growing anger. The humans had found a loophole and exploited it perfectly. But perhaps there was another way to test just how committed humanity was to its new civilian defense model. He began reviewing territorial claims along the human border. There were 3 systems that humanity had surveyed and claimed but not yet developed. Technically, under council law, if a species abandoned a claim and another species occupied it, the claim could be contested. Thex smiled. The humans had withdrawn from many border systems during their decommissioning, focusing their limited official military on core worlds. If the Gen moved to occupy one of these abandoned systems, what would the humans do? Their government military was too small to respond. Their civilian vessels had no legal standing to resist a legitimate territorial claim. It was perfect. The Gen would gain territory, and humanity would be forced to accept it or reveal that their civilian sector was actually a disguised military, which would bring council sanctions. Thex brought his plan to the High Coordinator, his uncle, who approved it immediately. Choose the Petra system, the High Coordinator said. It is valuable but not critical. If the humans accept our claim, we expand. If they resist improperly, the council will punish them. Either way, we win. Thex assembled a battle group of 40 warships. It was massive overkill for occupying an undeveloped system, but it would send a message. The mighty Gen hierarchy does not negotiate with humans. The mighty Gen hierarchy takes what it wishes. The fleet departed with Thex aboard the flagship, already imagining his triumphant return. Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the civilian cargo hauler Prometheus, watching the Gen fleet enter the Petra system on her sensors. Chen had retired from the Navy after the decommissioning, taking a position as CEO of the Petra Colonial Cooperative. The cooperative was owned by its members, 15,000 civilians who had pooled resources to claim and develop the Petra system. She studied the tactical display with the practiced eye of someone who had commanded warships for 30 years before retiring. The Gen had 40 ships, arranged in a standard fleet formation. They were heading directly for the inner system, confident and unchallenged. Status of the defense platforms, she asked her tactical officer, a civilian employee who had served as a fire control specialist on the UNS Stalingrad before its decommissioning. All 200 platforms are active and tracking the Gen fleet. Capacitors are charged, targeting solutions are locked. Civilian vessels, 47 ships in system, all cooperative members. They're in position and ready. Chen nodded. The Petra system looked empty to the Gen. They saw no military presence because there was no military presence. What they didn't realize was that every cargo ship, every mining vessel, every commercial platform was crewed by civilians who were also trained militia members, and every one of those civilians was armed. The Gen fleet reached the position Chen had anticipated, deep enough in system that retreat would be difficult. Her comm board lit up with an incoming hail. She accepted it. Ambassador General Thex's face appeared on her screen, and she saw recognition flicker in his eyes. He knew who she was, or rather who she had been. Captain Chen. I did not expect to find a disgraced naval officer commanding a civilian cargo ship. Chen smiled thinly. I'm not a captain anymore, Ambassador General. I'm a private citizen, CEO of the Petra Colonial Cooperative to be precise, and this is cooperative space. Please state your business. This system was claimed by humanity but abandoned. The Zhen hierarchy now claims it. We will be establishing a colonial presence. Any human vessels in the system should depart. I'm afraid that's not possible, Chen said calmly. Humanity's government did withdraw its claim, that's true, but the Petra Colonial Cooperative purchased the rights to this system from Earth's Bureau of Colonial Development 6 months ago. We have a legal deed registered with the Council. This is private property. Thex's expression darkened. Private property. This is a star system, not a house. Council law recognizes the right of private entities to purchase and develop colonial rights. We've filed all appropriate documentation. Would you like me to transmit it? I do not care about your paperwork. The Zhen hierarchy does not recognize. Then you're in violation of council law, Chen interrupted. Which puts us in an awkward position. You see, we've invested significant resources in developing this system. Those platforms you're seeing on your sensors, those are our defense installations. The ships around you, those are our corporate vessels, and we have the legal right to defend our property, Thex laughed. You think civilian platforms and cargo ships can threaten a Zhen battle group? You are delusional. Chen's smile never wavered. Perhaps you're right, but I'm curious, are you willing to test that theory? Because if you fire on civilian property, you'll be committing an act of piracy. And if we defend ourselves, well, that's just good business. You are bluffing. Am I? Chen closed the channel and opened a new one to her fleet. All ships, all platforms, this is CEO Chen. The Zhen have been warned and have rejected peaceful withdrawal. As of this moment, they are in violation of our territorial rights. Prepare to defend cooperative property. All personnel authorized to use necessary force. Light them up. 200 defense platforms went active simultaneously. Targeting sensors painted every Zhen ship from multiple angles. The 47 civilian vessels in the system powered up systems that no civilian ship should have. Shields flared to life. Weapons ports opened. Railguns charged. On the Zhen flagship, alarm klaxons began to wail. Thex stared at his tactical display in shock. Those platforms, they had military-grade targeting systems. Those cargo ships, they were powering weapons that matched warship specifications. His fleet was surrounded, outnumbered, and had been drawn into a kill box. Sir, we're being locked by over 400 individual weapon systems, his tactical officer reported, voice tight with stress. Thex's mind raced. This was supposed to be easy. This was supposed to be a demonstration of Zhen power. How did civilians, mere civilians, have this kind of capability? All ships combat alert, he ordered. Prepare to engage hostile vessels. Sir, they're civilians, his second officer protested. If we fire first the Council, they are clearly a military force masquerading as civilians. We will destroy them and let the Council sort it out later. The Zhen fleet began to maneuver into battle formation, weapons going hot. On the Prometheus, Chen watched the enemy commit themselves. All ships, they're going weapons free. You are authorized to engage. Defend your property. What followed was less a battle and more a demonstration of what happens when military tactics meet civilian determination backed by hidden capability. The Petra defense platforms fired first, not plasma or lasers like most galactic weapons, but solid kinetic impactors. Old-fashioned railgun technology, primitive by galactic standards, but devastating when fired at relativistic speeds. The Zhen shields, designed to dissipate energy weapons, performed poorly against solid projectiles with massive kinetic energy. 3 Zhen destroyers took critical damage in the first salvo, their shields collapsing under the unexpected attack profile. The civilian cargo ships revealed their true nature. The Prometheus's cargo launch system fired a spread of kinetic kill vehicles, mining charges for asteroid demolition, according to its civilian specifications. 12 Zhen fighters died in an instant. A mining ship called the Excavator 7 opened up with what its crew called industrial plasma cutters. The beam cut through a Zhen battlecruiser's shield and carved a glowing line across its hull. The Zhen returned fire, and they were not helpless. Their energy weapons found targets among the civilian fleet. 2 platforms were destroyed outright. The cargo ship New Frontier took a direct hit that overloaded its shields and left it drifting. For every civilian ship damaged, 3 Zhen vessels were hit. The humans fought with a coordination that spoke of military training because they were military, just not officially anymore. Every civilian captain was a former naval officer. Every crew member was militia trained. Every tactical decision was made with professional precision. Thex watched his fleet being systematically dismantled by civilians and felt cold rage. All ships, concentrate fire on the Prometheus. Kill that ship. 5 Zhen warships turned their weapons on Chen's vessel. The Prometheus's shields flared under the onslaught and alarms wailed on the bridge. Chen gripped her command chair as the ship shuddered. "Shields at 40%, her engineer called out. "Evasive pattern beta, return fire full spread." Chen's voice was calm despite the chaos. The Prometheus twisted through space, its engines pushing beyond civilian specifications because they were actually military engines with false documentation. The ship's missiles launched, or sample probes that happened to have shape-charged warheads. 2 Zhen destroyers took hits. 1 lost power and began to drift. The battle raged for 17 minutes. When it ended, 15 Zhen ships had been destroyed outright. 20 more were damaged, many critically. Only 5 vessels remained combat-capable and they were retreating. The civilian fleet had lost 3 platforms destroyed, 5 damaged. 2 ships were heavily damaged, including the Prometheus. No civilian vessels had been destroyed. Chen surveyed the wreckage floating in space and felt no satisfaction, only grim necessity. Salvage crews begin recovery operations. Medical teams, check for Zhen survivors, were taking prisoners. Thex's flagship was crippled, life support failing. When the civilian salvage ship Mercy extended a docking tube, he had no choice but to evacuate his surviving crew. He found himself in the hold of a human cargo ship, surrounded by civilians who moved like soldiers, staring at a woman who had defeated his fleet with ships that officially didn't exist. Chen approached him, her uniform. She was wearing a uniform now, not a civilian suit torn and scorched from the battle. Ambassador General Thex, on behalf of the Petra Colonial Cooperative, I'm placing you under arrest for piracy, destruction of private property, and endangerment of civilian lives. You'll be held pending legal proceedings. Thex stared at her in disbelief. You attacked Zhen military vessels with civilian ships. This is a violation of, we defended our legally owned property from an unprovoked attack, Chen corrected. Every ship in our fleet is registered as civilian. Every person aboard is a private citizen. Every platform is privately owned. We have the legal right to self-defense. You, on the other hand, attack civilian property in clear violation of Council law. The Council will never accept this. You are military in all but name. Chen leaned close, her voice cold. Prove it. Show me 1 violation of Council law. Show me 1 government military vessel in this system. Show me 1 active-duty military officer, not former officers exercising their right to civilian employment but active duty. You can't because there aren't any. You attacked civilians, Ambassador General, and civilians fought back. She straightened. Welcome to the new reality. Humanity doesn't need a government military to protect itself. We have something better, millions of citizens who refuse to be helpless. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was chaos. Ambassador Okonkwo stood at the center of it, calm as always, while around him species representatives shouted accusations and demands. Zhen delegation, led by High Coordinator Zentar himself, was demanding immediate sanctions against humanity. The minor species were in an uproar. The major powers watched with calculation, trying to determine how this would affect the balance of power. The chief Luminar counselor finally restored order, their crystalline form pulsing with light that commanded attention. The council will hear the Zhen hierarchy's complaint in full, followed by humanity's response. Ambassador General Thex, you have the floor. Thex stood, his body language radiating outrage despite the bandages from his injuries. Honored Council, The humans have made a mockery of your ruling. They claim to have demilitarized, but what happened at Petra proves otherwise. My fleet was attacked by over 200 military platforms and nearly 50 warships. 15 of our vessels were destroyed, hundreds of Gen lives lost. This was a military engagement, not civilian defense. He activated a holographic display showing footage from the battle. The devastating coordinated attacks, the military-grade weapons, the tactical precision, it all looked damning. The humans have simply relabeled their military as civilian and continued operating as before. They have violated the spirit of the Council's ruling, if not the letter. I demand that humanity be sanctioned, that their civilian vessels be impounded, and that reparations be paid for Gen losses. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber, particularly from species allied with the Gen. Okonkwo waited patiently for silence, then rose to speak. Honored counselors, the Gen hierarchy's complaint is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what occurred at Petra, and more broadly, a misunderstanding of humanity itself. His voice carried the weight of absolute confidence. Let me present the facts, supported by documentation that has been filed with this council over the past 14 months. He brought up his own display. First, the system in question. Petra was claimed by Earth's government, but that claim was released as part of our military reorganization. The Petra Colonial Cooperative, a private civilian organization, purchased the rights to that system through legal channels. I have the deed, the payment records, and the registration with the Council's Bureau of Colonial Affairs. This is not disputed. Thex tried to interrupt, but the Luminar counselor gestured for silence. Second, the defense installations. Every platform in the Petra system is privately owned by the Petra Colonial Cooperative. They were purchased legally, constructed at civilian shipyards, and registered as private property. Under Council law, private entities have the right to defend their property. This is not disputed in any galactic legal code. Okonkwo's display showed registration documents, ownership papers, thousands of pages of legal filings. Third, the vessels involved. Every single ship in the Petra system at the time of the incident was civilian registered. Not one government military vessel was present. The crews were private citizens, employees of various civilian corporations. Former military personnel, yes, but citizens have the right to choose their employment. A former soldier does not stop being a citizen. He paused, letting that sink in. Now, let us discuss what Ambassador General Thex describes as an attack. His fleet entered the Petra system without authorization and declared intention to seize private property. When informed that the system was legally owned, he refused to withdraw. When his fleet activated weapon systems in a threatening manner, the civilian property owners defended themselves. Self-defense is not aggression, counselors. It is a fundamental right recognized across the galaxy. The Veloran delegate rose. Ambassador Okonkwo, the Gen claim may have merit regardless of technical legalities. Those civilian vessels fought with military precision and capability. Surely you are not claiming this is coincidental. I claim nothing coincidental about it at all, Okonkwo replied calmly. Let me tell you about human culture, something this council has never bothered to understand. For thousands of years, humanity has maintained a tradition called the militia, the concept that ordinary citizens have not just the right, but the duty, to defend their homes and communities. Our most treasured legal documents enshrine the right to keep and bear arms. We have never trusted our safety solely to government forces. He began walking around the chamber, addressing each delegation directly. Most of your species centralized military power long ago. Your civilians are truly civilian, unarmed, untrained, dependent on government for protection. You cannot imagine anything else, but humanity's history is different. We have known tyranny, oppression, conquest. We learned that an armed populace is the final defense against subjugation. When this council ruled that we must disarm our government military, you thought you were weakening us, but you were thinking in your terms, not ours. You thought that without a government military we would be helpless. You forgot, or never understood, that humanity's strength was never in our government, it was always in our people. The Torgeth delegates spoke, their voice a deep rumble. You admit, then, that your civilian sector is actually a disguised military, that these corporations and cooperatives are merely fronts for military organization. I admit no such thing, Okonkwo said sharply. The Petra Colonial Cooperative is exactly what it claims to be, a civilian organization formed by citizens to colonize and develop a star system. But those citizens made a choice. They chose to be trained in self-defense. They chose to arm their ships and build defensive platforms. They chose to be ready to protect what is theirs. These are choices free people make, not orders from a government. He returned to his position and brought up a new display. Let me show you the scope of what humanity has done, so there can be no confusion about where we stand. The display showed statistics that made the council chamber fall silent. In the 16 months since your ruling, humanity's government has maintained exactly 12 military vessels and 30 military platforms, as ordered. We are in perfect compliance. However, in that same time period, private citizens and civilian corporations have acquired or constructed 8,247 vessels with defensive capability. They have built 2,418 defense platforms. They have trained 15 million people in what we call the civilian militia. He let the numbers hang in the air. Every human colony is now defended by privately owned assets, operated by civilian volunteers, funded by the colonists themselves. Every human ship traveling the spaceways has the capability to defend itself. Every human citizen has the right, and increasingly the training to protect their home. The chief counselor spoke, their voice carrying an edge. Ambassador Okonkwo, surely you see the concern. You have created a situation where humanity has more military capability now than before the ruling. We have created a situation where humanity cannot be disarmed by external decree, Okonkwo corrected. There is a difference. The council can regulate governments, but you cannot regulate the right of free people to defend themselves. Unless, of course, the council wishes to extend its authority over all civilian activities of all species. That caused an immediate uproar. The Gen might want humanity controlled, but they and every other species jealously guarded their civilian autonomy from council oversight. The major powers particularly would never accept council regulation of their corporate sectors. When silence returned, Okonkwo continued, the council faces a choice. You can accept that humanity has found a legal path to self-determination within your laws, or you can attempt to close that path, but only by granting the council far more power over all species than any of you would accept. The Merkai delegate rose, their chromatophores rippling with what Okonkwo had learned to recognize as amusement. Ambassador, let us be direct. You have outmaneuvered the council legally. We understand this. You must also understand the concern. What prevents humanity from using this civilian military for aggression? The same thing that prevents anyone from aggression, consequences, Okonkwo replied. If human civilians attack others without cause, they can be prosecuted as pirates or criminals. If they violate council law, sanctions can be applied. But if they defend their legal property from unprovoked attack, as happened at Petra, they are within their rights. The same rights any species claims. Thex stood again, his voice tight with anger. This is sophistry. You have created a loophole that makes the council's authority meaningless. If every species adopts this model, there will be no way to regulate military power. Then perhaps, Okonkwo said quietly, military power should not be regulated by external authority. Perhaps the only legitimate limit on a species' ability to defend itself is what its own people will accept. He turned to address the entire council. You tried to make humanity weak because we are young and you are old. You tried to use law as a weapon against us, but we are also old counselors, not in space but in statecraft and law and the understanding of power. We wrote the book on constitutional government and individual rights. We are very, very good at finding freedom within systems designed to constrain us. He straightened, his voice taking on steel. The council may rescind your ruling if you wish. We will accept that. But you cannot force us to be helpless. You cannot decree that free people surrender their right to self-defense. And if you try, you will find that humanity is not the only species watching this precedent. How many minor species in this chamber wish they had the power to defend themselves against the major powers? How many would adopt our model if given the chance? The chamber erupted in heated debate. The minor species were indeed watching with great interest. The idea that they could defend themselves without relying on alliances with the major powers was revolutionary. The major powers saw the threat immediately. Their dominance rested partly on smaller species' helplessness. The chief counselor called for order and when it was achieved spoke carefully. The council will adjourn to consider this matter. Ambassador Okonkwo, your presentation is noted. Ambassador General Thex, your complaint is registered. We will reconvene in 3 cycles. During those 3 cycles, Okonkwo worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He met with delegates from minor species, planting seeds. He provided technical information on how humanity's system worked, how it could be adapted by others. He didn't need to promise anything. The idea itself was the offer. The major powers huddled in their own meetings, calculating. The Gen wanted humanity punished, but they also wanted to maintain the precedent of council authority. The Veloran Confederacy was torn between supporting the old order and recognizing a legal fait accompli. The Torgeth Unity was actually impressed by humanity's audacity, though they'd never admit it publicly. The Luminar Collective, as always, cared most about maintaining stability. When the council reconvened, the chief counselor delivered the ruling. The council has carefully considered the situation at Petra and the broader question of humanity's compliance with our previous ruling. We find as follows. First, humanity's government has fully complied with the requirement to reduce military forces. No violation exists. Second, the civilian activities of human citizens and corporations are outside the scope of the original ruling. Third, the incident at Petra constituted legitimate self-defense by civilians against military aggression. Thex looked stricken. The Gen delegation began objecting, but the counselor continued. However, the council also finds that Ambassador General Thex acted improperly in attacking civilian property without sufficient cause. The Gen hierarchy is ordered to pay reparations to the Petra Colonial Cooperative for damages incurred. Furthermore, the Gen must formally recognize the cooperative's legal claim to the Petra system. It was a complete reversal. The Gen had gone from prosecutors to defendants. Thex stood frozen, unable to believe what he was hearing. Finally, the counselor said, the council notes that humanity's approach to defense represents a significant shift in galactic norms. While legal, it raises questions about the future of military regulation. The council will establish a committee to study these issues and make recommendations. All species are invited to participate. The session ended, and Okonkwo allowed himself a small smile. The committee would take years to reach any conclusions, and by then, the precedent would be set. Other species would have already begun adopting aspects of humanity's model. The galaxy was changing, and there was no putting that genie back in the bottle. As he left the chamber, the Merkai delegate approached him. Ambassador, you have played this brilliantly, but I must ask, was this your plan from the beginning? When you accepted the council's ruling so calmly, did you already see this outcome? Okonkwo considered the question. I saw the possibility. Humans have a saying, necessity is the mother of invention. The council created the necessity. Humanity invented the solution. Whether it was planned or emergent doesn't matter. What matters is that we will never be helpless again. 6 months later, Captain Maria Chen stood on the observation deck of the Prometheus, now fully repaired and upgraded. Through the viewport, she could see the Petra system thriving. 3 new colonies had been established. The population had grown to 50,000. Construction ships worked constantly, building infrastructure for a world that would one day house millions. And defending it all were the platforms, the civilian ships, the militia members who trained regularly and took their duty seriously. Not because a government ordered them to, but because they chose to. Chen heard footsteps behind her and turned to see James Park approaching. He'd taken a position as the cooperative's chief of security, another civilian job filled by former military. The latest numbers are in, Park said, handing her a data pad. 8 more colonies have adopted our model. The new Nairobi Defense Association, the Tau Ceti Development Corporation, even the Europa Free Collective. Everyone wants to control their own security now. How are the other species reacting? Chen asked. Mixed. The chorus have quietly started a similar program. The Merkai are considering it. Some of the minor species are definitely interested. The major powers are nervous. They relied on smaller species being dependent on them for protection. That's ending. Chen nodded slowly. The Zhen, Thex was recalled in disgrace, stripped of rank, exiled to a minor posting. The Zhen pulled back from all human borders. They can't afford to fight millions of armed civilians. It's too expensive, too risky, and they can't win decisively even if they succeed tactically. And the council, Park smiled, still arguing in committee about what to do, which means they're doing nothing. By the time they figure it out, it won't matter. The galaxy has already changed. Chen looked back out at the Petra system, her system now, defended by her people. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here, from patrol captain to warrior to exile to leader. She thought about the 200 who had died when Thex first attacked, about the injustice of the council's ruling, about the long months of uncertainty. "Do you think they understand yet?" she asked quietly. "The council, the Zhen, all of them. Do they understand what they did?" Park stood beside her, looking out at the same view. "They thought they were teaching us our place. They thought they were showing us that they controlled the rules, that they had the power. They forgot something fundamental. What's that? That humanity has been dealing with tyrants and unjust rulers for thousands of years. We've developed whole philosophies about how free people resist oppression. We wrote documents, fought wars, built nations on the idea that power ultimately comes from the consent of the governed, not the decree of the powerful. The council tried to use their law against us, but they didn't realize we're better at this game than they are. We've been playing it longer." Chen smiled. "We showed them what free people can do when pushed. Not soldiers following orders, but citizens choosing to stand. That's the difference they never understood. And now it's too late for them to contain it," Park added. "The idea is out there. Every species that's ever felt helpless, ever been pushed around by the major powers, now has an example to follow. We didn't just free ourselves. We showed the whole galaxy how to be free." Chen turned from the viewport, ready to return to work. There was always more to do, more training to organize, more defenses to build, more colonists to welcome. The Petra system would grow, and with it, humanity's place in the galaxy would be secured, not through government decree or council permission, but through the choices of millions of individuals who refused to be victims. "You know what the best part is," Chen said as they walked toward the bridge. "The council wanted us to be civilized, to fit into their systems, to accept their authority. We did all of that. We followed their laws perfectly, and in doing so, we proved that civilization doesn't mean weakness. It means being smart enough to win without breaking the rules." Park laughed. "I bet Thex would disagree. He thought rules were for keeping others in line, not limiting himself." "Then he learned an important lesson," Chen replied. "Never underestimate a species that reads the fine print." In the Galactic Council chamber, months later, a Luminar elder spoke privately with the chief counselor. "We made an error with humanity, did we not?" The chief counselor's crystalline form pulsed with colors that indicated regret. "We thought we were teaching them their place. We thought that by limiting their military, we could control their power. We were thinking in terms of our own species, our own histories where military strength equals governmental strength. And now we understand that humanity is different. Their individuals are dangerous because they think of themselves as sovereign. Their government doesn't grant them rights. Their philosophy says rights are inherent. We can't control them through their government because their government doesn't fully control them." The elder considered this. "Will others follow their example?" "Already are. The chorus, the Merkai, several minor species. They're adopting the human model of decentralized defense. In 50 years, the galaxy's power structure will look very different. Should we have simply accepted humanity's position in the original case? Let the Zhen aggression be punished." The chief counselor pulsed with something that might have been humor in a crystalline being. "Yes, we should have. Justice would have been simpler than politics. Now we have established a precedent that may undo galactic governance as we know it. The irony is that humanity was willing to work within the system. We forced them to break it." "Not break it," the elder corrected. "Reforge it. They followed every law, they just interpreted them in a way we never imagined." Because we never imagined a species where every citizen sees themselves as a soldier in waiting, where every community sees itself as sovereign, where the government serves the people rather than the reverse. We've dealt with democracies before, but never one that took the concept this seriously. The elder gestured toward the records. What now? Now, we adapt. The Council's power rested on our ability to regulate military force. That power is diminished. We can still provide value, mediation, trade regulation, scientific cooperation, but we cannot compel obedience from species who can defend themselves. The age of the Council as final authority may be ending. Because of humanity. Because humanity showed it was possible to resist. Once the possible becomes visible, it becomes inevitable. The chief counselor turned to face the empty chamber. We thought they were children because they were young in space. We forgot that they are old in statecraft. And we paid for our arrogance. Back on Earth, President Rodriguez sat in the Oval Office with Ambassador Okonkwo, reviewing the latest reports. The strategy had worked beyond their best projections. Humanity was secure, other species were adopting similar models, and the galaxy was shifting toward a more balanced power structure. You gambled everything on a legal theory, Rodriguez said. What if the Council had ruled against us anyway, law be damned? Okonkwo smiled. Then we would have had a choice, submit or rebel, but I didn't think they would. The major powers jealously guard their own civilian autonomy. They couldn't rule against us without creating a precedent that would limit themselves. Self-interest made them honest. And now humanity is secure. Not because we're the strongest military power, we're not, but because we're the most distributed. You can't conquer us without fighting 1 billion battles. You can't negotiate with us by threatening our government because our people don't need government permission to defend themselves. We're not an empire that can be broken. We're a civilization of free people who choose to stand together. Rodriguez leaned back. Do you think it will last, this model? It has to, Okonkwo replied. Because it's the only model that truly respects individual sovereignty while providing collective security. The old galactic model, strong central governments controlling everything, creates the conditions for tyranny. Our model makes tyranny nearly impossible because power is too distributed to seize. And if other species adopt it, then the galaxy becomes a more dangerous place for tyrants and a safer place for everyone else, which is exactly as it should be. Okonkwo stood, preparing to leave. Humanity didn't come to the stars to dominate. We came to be free. And now we've shown the galaxy what freedom really means. Rodriguez watched him go, then turned to look at the portrait of George Washington on the wall. The first president of the United States, the man who had voluntarily surrendered power, who had established the precedent that government served the people. She wondered what he would think of humanity now, spreading those same principles across the stars. Probably, she decided, he would approve. The fight for liberty never ended. It just found new frontiers. The story of humanity's legal victory over the Galactic Council spread across the stars, told and retold, embellished and analyzed. It became a case study in every galactic law school, a cautionary tale for every government that thought it could control others through legal maneuvering. But the real story wasn't in the council chambers or the battlefields. It was in the thousands of human colonies where citizens trained together, built defenses together, and created something new, communities that were simultaneously peaceful and prepared, civilized and capable of violence, cooperative and fiercely independent. It was in the mining ships that were also warships, the cargo haulers that carried both trade goods and armaments, the civilian platforms that watched the stars with sensors designed for war but used for peace. It was in the fundamental transformation of what it meant to be human in space, not subjects of Earth's government but citizens of humanity, not soldiers or civilians but both and neither, free people who would defend their freedom without asking permission. The Galactic Council had tried to teach humanity a lesson about power and politics. Instead, humanity had taught the galaxy a lesson about freedom and determination, and the galaxy would never be the same. In the end, the Council's ruling had accomplished something, just not what they intended. They had wanted to weaken humanity. Instead, they had forced humanity to discover its true strength, not in ships or weapons, but in the unbreakable will of free people who refuse to be disarmed, who refuse to be controlled, who refuse to surrender their right to defend themselves and those they love. Ambassador General Thex had laughed when humanity accepted the Council's ruling. But somewhere in his exile, stripped of rank and honor, he finally understood why that laughter had been premature. Humanity hadn't surrendered. They had simply changed the battlefield to one where they couldn't lose. And across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds where people had always felt helpless before the might of the major powers, a new idea was taking root. The idea that maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to be helpless. That maybe they could defend themselves. That maybe freedom was worth fighting for. Humanity had come to the stars carrying that idea like a torch. And now that torch was spreading, lighting fires that would never be extinguished. The Galactic Council had tried to control humanity by limiting their military. They learned too late that humanity's greatest weapon was never their fleet. It was their refusal to be anything less than free.